Alright, so here we go. I've already gone ahead and filmed this. I'm just going to go ahead and speed it up for the sake of argument. So we're going to go ahead and kind of build on what we already know. Using our paintbrush or pencil tool, whatever the heck you want to use, I would make a new layer ahead of time. And on that layer, I'm going to think about having two different lines kind of collide with each other, almost like a Dragon Ball Z whenever the characters from far away are kind of bashing into each other, or just like two random comets kind of zipping around the universe. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of make these paths on a separate drawing layer. And notice I'm color coding them just to kind of help my own sanity, basically, so I can kind of see where I want to take these lines. So I'm going to have one, let's call it a comet for the red line, and one comet for the blue line. And those white lines there are kind of where they collide. And you can obviously add in extra little animation tidbits here and there too to kind of jazz up your picture. So then I'm going to go ahead on this kind of background layer and start to divide up my space so I can kind of think about the keyframes. So I've got 10 total keyframes on this line, and what that basically means is that I need to go through and make sure that the other line, in this case the blue line, has also 10 lines because we need them to collide together. So I'm going to kind of divide them up here kind of sparingly and then kind of slice it up in between here and there. This will also help me show speed. Right? The closer together those green lines are, the slower my character or my little meteor comet guy goes. The further apart they are, then the slower it goes. So here it looks like I've kind of started out, or further apart they go much faster, excuse me. So here you can see it kind of goes really far apart, which means that it's going to go much quicker. And as they come around the arc there on that blue line, they get a little bit closer together. So it kind of goes fast, then slow, then fast again, almost like a roller coaster if you want to think about it that way. So I've got these lines again, I'm just kind of dividing them up so I know where I'm going to go. So coming around, again, I'm just thinking about the total number of lines. I have to make sure that it's equal on both sides, otherwise that meteor isn't going to collide together. So whenever they do collide, we'll do a little squash and stretch and have it almost like they're bouncing off of each other. Alright, so just switch up my layers here real quick. I'm going to take this background, just kind of stretch it out and make it into make it one keyframe that lasts the entire length of my animation. Now I'm going to go ahead and zoom in, make a new keyframe, and for this time around I'm going to go ahead back to our kind of circle tool, our little ellipse tool, and feel free, you can always make things bigger or smaller, and again that's going to add a good sense of depth and dimension. So I'm going to kind of start small and then get a little bit bigger as I go along. And I'll worry about coloring them in. Maybe, think about it like a comet might have like a little tail. I'm going to draw that tail on later on. So I'm kind of thinking about how big each one of these can be. And of course, these are all in the same keyframe. That's not how we want to do it for proper animation, but I just wanted to kind of show you the idea of scale. So let's just get rid of those real quick. Okay, so that's keyframe number 1. Jump 2, because we're shooting on 2s, make a new keyframe. Turn on my onion skinning, and there it goes. So we'll just do that again. And again, and again, and again. And feel free to use the shortcut on your keyboard, F6. Will definitely make the whole process a lot quicker, making those keyframes. Remember that whatever you put on a keyframe is going to kind of lock it in there. That's the whole concept of keyframing. Eventually we'll get into deeper concepts about keyframing and how we can get into in-betweening as well, where the computer does a little bit of the work for us, just like in 3D animation. So let's say it went from really small, now it's gotten kind of big, so not only is it going around this curve, but it's also going through and getting kind of larger and smaller. So it's kind of developing in scale as well as developing with a sense of movement. So there it comes, kind of all the way around the bend here, and that gives us a good sense of movement. Each one of these keyframes, you can see my little line here is kind of jumping around. Big jump right there, going from kind of medium to small, and then it's going to collide right there, just like so. And obviously whenever they do collide, there'll be a little bit of a squash and stretch as well. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So we'll just add in one extra little frame here, remembering to adjust that later. So there's kind of my squash, and there's my stretch. I'm kind of skew that out there. Alright, so added in one extra little frame, but again, I'll just remember that. So I'm going to go along over here and kind of adjust these circles. If they're going faster, they're probably going to have a little bit of a stretch to them, right? Just like if your cartoon's moving really quickly, it's going to have that kind of bend and pull to it. I'll do the same thing over on the right hand side over here, where I kind of squash and stretch my circle. Okay, looks good. Alright, so there's my ball moving around, one keyframe or one circle per keyframe, pretty easily. So I'm going to make a new drawing layer. This is going to be my, my blue circle. I'm going to do the exact same thing here. You can rename it at any time. So I'm going to go ahead and make a keyframe, and I'm going to do the exact same thing I did a second ago. This time around, we'll just change the little circle to blue, and again, keyframe, keyframe, keyframe. Keep that onion skinning on. It really makes things pretty easy for you too. Remember too that our little background kind of curved, I don't know what you call it, little curvy kind of roller coaster line that we're going along with, you can always adjust things. You don't have to stay exactly on that line. That's just kind of meant to be a guide to help you remember, oh, I have to add 10 frames instead of 12 frames or something like that. And again, eventually we're going to get really into keyframing and start talking about how you don't have to go in a linear fashion like I'm doing right now, where I'm going from frame 1 to frame 2 to frame 3. Instead, you can start getting in the habit of doing, frame 1 to frame 30, and then going back to frame 15 and adding things in and adding things in, and slowly but surely you're going to be able to kind of hammer out a fully fleshed out, character-based cartoon really quickly. The process can speed up exponentially as long as you kind of remember some of these certain techniques that we'll talk about in class. So again, I'm just kind of adjusting my pacing a little bit. Looks like my little spheres here are a little too bunched up, and I want to make sure that I have enough time for them to collide and have a little bit of squash and stretch in there as well, so they kind of time out. And I'm just kind of scrubbing on the little timeline, give it a little bit of a skew, and make sure things are looking pretty good. So there's my squash, there's my stretch, a little bit of a pull right there. That looks pretty good. Same thing as it comes around the bend there. I'll worry about that later. We'll add on a little snippet here for a tail. And again, just a little squash and stretch and a little bit of a skew to take that circle and kind of give it a little bit of a bend. Really helps add some dynamic action to it. So that looks pretty good. And again, if you're testing it, you can always turn off your onion skinning if that gets in the way. Also, you can always hit those little googly eyeballs on your layer menu, and that'll turn off a particular layer. So I'm just going to use the paint bucket tool here to fill that in, and I'm just using the paintbrush tool. You could use paintbrush or pencil really to kind of fill in this, add like a little tail to it. Again, if it's like a comet or like a Dragon Ball Z character flying around, you want like a little bit of a trail because it's moving so fast that it kind of goes super fast there. So I can actually use the paint bucket to fill in my tail. The faster it goes, the longer the tail gets. Eventually we'll talk more about the idea or concept of volume. So the idea is, as this thing blurs, as this tail gets extra long, the sphere itself is also going to get a little bit smaller, simply because there's more of it being stretched out. It always has the same level of volume, it's just a matter of where we put it at, right? So the longer the tail, the smaller the ball. It has almost like a slinky effect, if you want to think about it that way. Okay, so just kind of finishing these up real quick. Coloring in those little tails, and again, you can totally take way more time than I'm doing. This is just the sake of a demo. I want to make sure that it looks pretty good. In a second here, whenever I wrap this up, I'm going to click over and show you an example that I have on loop. I'll let it play through 3 different times, and just kind of an old pencil test I had done years and years ago of this exact same project to get kind of an idea of what a finished version might actually look like. So that pretty much wraps up our animation. You can kind of see as it kind of scrubs along here. I'll just turn that eyeball off, turn off my onion skinning, and there it goes. Right, pretty quick. I might want to turn down my frame rate. But let's show you an example of what a finished piece might actually look like. You want to have your comets colliding at least 3 times. So let's check that out.